I thought we were celebrating. I thought the dinner Marcus had arranged at Aurelio's, the restaurant with the white linen tablecloths and the sommelier who remembered your name, was a gesture of love, a recognition of everything I had worked for over 7 years of marriage and a decade of grinding in the same corporate tower. I thought the midnight blue dress I had bought, the one with the thin straps that Marcus had once said made me look like I belonged somewhere important, was exactly right for the evening. I thought we were happy. I had no idea that by the time the breadbasket arrived, my husband would look across the table at me, in front of our closest friends, his family, his colleagues, and tell me quietly and deliberately and without a single trace of regret that I was an embarrassment. He didn't shout. He didn't say it in the heat of some argument that had been building all evening. He said it the way you correct a subordinate in a meeting, lowering his voice to precisely the register that carries not far, just far enough. He set down his fork first, as though he needed both hands free for the precision of it. "You're embarrassing yourself, Clara." 6 words. Somehow the whole table heard. 12 people arranged around that table. 12 people who had toasted at our wedding, who had known me for years. And not one of them said a word. His mother, Eleanor, reached for her wine glass. His brother, Daniel, studied the menu he had already ordered from. My best friend, Priya, opened her mouth, closed it again, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. A grief, a recognition. The look of someone who has known something for a long time and is watching you arrive at it in the worst possible way. That was the night my marriage ended. Not legally, not immediately. There were still weeks ahead of me, weeks of lawyers and locked drawers and sleepless mornings. But it ended there, at table 7, over a dinner I had looked forward to for days. And what I discovered in the wreckage of the life we had built, what had been waiting in the dark beneath the surface of our ordinary, beautiful-seeming days, was something I never could have imagined. To understand where I ended up, you have to understand where I started and how carefully, invisibly, the ground had been giving way beneath my feet the entire time I was walking on it. Marcus and I met at a conference in Chicago 11 years ago. He was presenting a case study on supply chain optimization, which sounds unbearably dry, but which he delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that makes a room lean forward. When the session ended, he walked directly toward me and said, without preamble, "You asked the best question in that room." I had asked a pointed question about ethical sourcing, and he had handled it gracefully, redirecting without flinching, and I suppose that should have told me something, that he was very good at handling things gracefully on the surface, while something else moved underneath. But I was 28 and impressed by ease, and 3 months later I was in love in the particular, total way you are only in love once, before you learn to read the water for undercurrents. We married 4 years later in Asheville, under a white tent strung with warm lights that my mother and I spent 3 weekends hanging by hand. My father walked me down the aisle to a piece of classical guitar that Marcus had chosen specifically because, he said, it sounded like what it felt like to find something you'd been looking for without knowing you were searching. I cried during the vows. He squeezed both my hands so tightly I felt the rings press into my fingers. His mother, Eleanor, sat in the front row in a cream-colored dress that was just slightly too close to white. And when the officiant pronounced us married, she was the first one on her feet, not to applaud, but to reach for Marcus, to fold him into her arms before he had even kissed me. I remember standing at the altar in my veil, watching my husband turned half away from me in the first seconds of our marriage, and telling myself it was a small thing, a mother's reflex, a forgivable excess. I have spent considerable time since then cataloging all the small things I forgave. We settled in Charlotte, Marcus at a regional logistics firm, I at a corporate law practice. We bought a craftsman bungalow on Elmwood Drive, hardwood floors, wraparound porch, a backyard where I planted heirloom tomatoes and lavender that took 2 seasons to establish. The house was in my name. I had saved the down payment over 6 years of deliberate sacrifice, and my financial advisor had recommended keeping it as a sole asset. Marcus agreed easily. I took that as evidence of his respect for my independence. I understand now that it was patience. It was waiting. Eleanor visited 4 times a year, arriving always before noon in her silver Buick with a casserole dish covered in foil and a list of observations dressed as questions. Don't you think the living room would feel larger with the bookcase on the far wall? Marcus looks a little thin. Are you eating properly at home? I learned to answer with soft, practiced deflection. You might be right. We'll think about it. Marcus would watch these exchanges from the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, offering me the small apologetic shrug I had always interpreted as private solidarity and that I now recognize as something else entirely, the habitual stepping back of a man who had decided, long before I appeared in his life, that the path of least resistance was his preferred terrain. The first real warning came 18 months before the dinner at Aurelio's. I came home late on a Thursday evening in October to find Eleanor at my kitchen table, with a spread of printed documents in front of her, and Marcus standing at the counter with his back to me, and a quality of silence in the room that reached me before I had even put down my bag. "Oh, Clara," Eleanor said, looking up with a wide, warm smile. "We were just going over some options for the porch renovation." I walked to the table. I am a lawyer. I can identify a document type in the time it takes most people to register that paper is present. What I saw were property transfer forms, not contractor estimates, not architectural drawings. With my home address printed at the top of the first page, my name was not on them. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember the smell of Eleanor's casserole, rosemary and potato, warm and domestic, and how ordinary it smelled against the wrongness of what was laid out on my table. "What is this?" I asked. Marcus turned from the counter with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not guilt, but something closer to irritation, the mild annoyance of someone interrupted mid-task. "Mom has a contact at a real estate firm," he said. "She was walking me through some refinancing structures. It's nothing official." I looked at Eleanor. Her hands were folded in a posture of patient goodwill. "Just a template," she said, smiling. "I wanted Marcus to understand his options going forward." His options. Standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, looking at transfer documents for my own property, I was being told about his options. I said very little. I gathered the documents from the table. Eleanor's hand twitched toward them as I did, an involuntary reflex she caught half a second too late, and I photographed every page before filing them in a locked drawer. Later, Marcus sat on the edge of my desk and said his mother worried that she just wanted them to be secure. "She had transfer documents for my house," I said. "Legal documents I never authorized." "She was just exploring options," he said, the phrase landing like something rehearsed, like a line prepared before I walked through the door. And he kissed my forehead and said he would speak to her. Not, "I already told her this was wrong. Tell me if it makes you uncomfortable," which placed the problem inside my discomfort rather than inside the document I had just locked away. I told myself I had handled it. I believed that because I needed to. The months that followed had a new texture to them, subtler and harder to name. Marcus began taking his mother's daily calls in the garage, the bedroom with the door locked, the car in the driveway at odd hours. He became careful around money in conversation, a slight tightening around the eyes when I mentioned my investment account or the renovation budget. He asked questions dressed as curiosity. How much did I have in savings? Had I thought about restructuring the mortgage? I answered honestly every time, and I would watch something register in his face as I answered, a small, private filing away. And I would think, later, in the shower with the water too hot, that something was wrong. Then I would remind myself who this man was. The man who had driven 4 hours through snow to be at my side when my grandmother was hospitalized. The man who still, on quiet Sunday mornings, looked at me the way he had in Chicago. People don't love you with one hand and plan something against you with the other, except that they do, except that the love is precisely what makes the other thing possible. The promotion came 6 weeks before the dinner. I was made senior partner, the youngest in my firm's 40-year history, and the salary that came with it was significant enough that my financial advisor called it a structural change. I was proud in a way I rarely allowed myself to be, deeply and quietly proud, the pride of someone who had wanted something for a very long time and had not let the wanting become an excuse to stop working. I told Marcus over dinner, the words careful and measured, because I had learned early that my ambition made him quiet in a particular way, a going still that felt like absence. He congratulated me warmly. He opened the good bottle of wine. He said, "We need to celebrate this properly. Let me plan something." And I remember the exact quality of it, a loosening, a relief, a sense that this was the Marcus who showed up when it counted. He planned the dinner at Aurelio's, inviting 12 people without consulting me, his parents, his brother Daniel and wife, colleagues, mutual friends, and Priya, my oldest friend in the city. He told me only that it was a celebration dinner, to dress up, that it would be a good evening. I bought the dress on a Tuesday afternoon, turning in front of a 3-way mirror and thinking, yes, this is exactly right. I arrived at 7:15 feeling a lightness I had not felt in longer than I could accurately name, a sense of occasion, of arrival, of things being exactly where they were supposed to be. We were at the table 40 minutes before it happened. The conversation was warm, the wine excellent, Eleanor on her best behavior, gracious, laughing at the right moments, touching Marcus's arm with the composed affection of someone who has spent decades perfecting her performance. I was in the middle of telling Priya a story, halfway through a sentence, when Marcus said my name, not urgently, just Clara. I turned. He wore the expression I recognized from years of small, catalogued moments, the look he used when he felt I was taking up too much room, being too present in a space where he had decided I should be smaller. I trailed off. "What?" I said. He set down his fork with the deliberateness of a man who has already decided what he is about to do, looked at me across the white tablecloth and the flickering candle and 12 waiting faces, and said, "You're embarrassing yourself." The table went silent. Instantly, completely, the way sound disappears when something irreversible has been spoken. I looked at him. He looked back with the unruffled composure of someone who believes they are in the right. I felt heat climb from my chest to my throat, my fingers going cold around the wine glass, and then, most clearly of all, a terrible clarity. Not the blurred burning of humiliation, but something clean and cold, like a lock engaging, like a door swinging shut on a room I had lived in for 7 years. 12 people, not one word. Eleanor sipped her wine. Daniel found something absorbing in the middle distance. Priya looked at me with an expression that carried everything she couldn't say aloud. I know. I've been watching this happen. I am so sorry it came to this. I put down my wine glass. I folded my napkin. I picked up my clutch. "Excuse me," I said to the room, to no one, to all of them. I stood. I walked through the restaurant, past the other tables, past the bar, past the host stand and the coat check and the heavy glass door, and I stepped into the October night and did not look back. Not once. I stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cool air, which smelled of exhaust and fallen leaves, and I waited for devastation, the trembling, the tears, the collapse. What came instead was stillness, the deep, quiet stillness of someone who has finally stopped fighting the knowledge they have been carrying. I had known for months, felt it in the texture of silences, in the rehearsed phrases, in the documents on my kitchen table. I had known and chosen not to act on it because acting required dismantling everything. Standing on that sidewalk in the midnight blue dress, the city moving around me in its ordinary, unconcerned way, I understood that I was ready now, that he had, in his particular precision, done me the service of removing every remaining doubt. My phone buzzed. Priya. "Where are you?" she said, her voice already at the coat check. "Outside," I said. "Don't go back in," she said. "I know," I said. A car arrived. She was beside me on the sidewalk, her coat half on, her face carrying the expression of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and is finally setting it down. She put her arm around my shoulders. "How long have you known?" I asked. She was quiet. "A while," she said. "I kept thinking you'd see it." I nodded. "Tell me everything," I said. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight you just need to be somewhere safe. But soon, everything, I promise." We got into the car. The city moved past the windows, all its lit rooms and ordinary lives, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I thought, he made a mistake tonight. He showed me exactly what I was dealing with in front of witnesses, at a table he arranged. He thought it was a demonstration of power. He had no idea it was a confession, and I was going to use every word of it. Priya told me everything the next morning over coffee at her kitchen table, with the kind of methodical, careful delivery of someone who has been rehearsing this conversation in their head for a long time and is determined to get it right. She sat across from me in her blue terry cloth robe with both hands wrapped around her mug, and she said, "I want to start by telling you that I tried to find a way to say this without it destroying anything. I couldn't find one, so I'm just going to say it." What she said took 40 minutes. She had to stop twice to refill her coffee, and once because I needed to stand up and walk to the window and breathe for a moment before I could keep listening. 3 months earlier, Priya had run into Daniel, Marcus's brother, at a downtown wine bar. They had been friendly for years, the comfortable, low-stakes friendliness of people who like each other but move in slightly separate orbits. Daniel had been 2 glasses in and carrying something uncomfortable on his face, and when Priya sat down with him and asked how things were, he had said, "I keep telling myself it's not my business." And then he had told her. Eleanor had retained a real estate attorney 6 months ago. Not the contact she had mentioned to Marcus and me, but a separate attorney, a woman in Greenville whose firm specialized in marital property restructuring. The goal, as Daniel understood it from a conversation he had overheard at his mother's house, was to establish a framework by which the Elmwood Drive property could be transferred out of my sole name in the event of a divorce, which Eleanor had been planning to engineer, not waiting for, planning. She had given Marcus an ultimatum, which Daniel described in the flat, exhausted tone of a man recounting something he wishes he had never heard. Either Marcus worked with her to secure the house before my promotion changed the financial picture irrevocably, or Eleanor would withdraw the inheritance she had promised him, a property in Greenville worth considerably more than sentimentality. She had given him 3 months. The dinner at Aurelio's, Daniel believed, was connected. He didn't know exactly how. He just knew that Marcus had come home from their mother's house the week before, looking like a man who had made a decision he couldn't unmake. I stood at Priya's window with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I looked out at her neighbor's oak tree, which was bare in November, all its complicated bones exposed against the gray sky, and I thought, the dinner was not a celebration. The dinner was a setup. He had invited colleagues, witnesses to my professional life. He had invited his mother, the architect of whatever came next. He had humiliated me publicly in a way that could be framed, later, as evidence of instability, of my volatility, of the kind of behavior that justifies concern. "You're embarrassing yourself," said quietly, in front of 12 people, said in a way that would be remembered, said in a way that, if the story were ever told from a different angle, could sound like a man wearily managing a wife who had become difficult. The cold that moved through me was not the cold of panic. It was the cold of absolute clarifying fury. Not hot, not ragged, but precise, like a surgical instrument, like the feeling of knowing exactly what you are going to do before you have consciously decided to do it. "I need to go home," I said. Priya looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "I need to get to my files," I said, "the documents I photographed 18 months ago, and I need to check something." She drove me. She waited in the car in the driveway while I went inside. Marcus's car was not there. The house was quiet, and it smelled like the house always smelled. The faint cedar of the wood floors, the clean, cool air of a well-kept room. And I moved through it as though I were a stranger learning its geography for the first time. I went to my home office. I unlocked the drawer. The photographs were there, exactly as I had left them. I spread them on the desk and looked at them properly, without the shock of discovery distorting my vision, with the calm focus I brought to the most complex cases at the firm. The transfer forms were dated 16 months ago. Eleanor's real estate attorney's name was on the letterhead, partially obscured by a fold but legible. The signatures on the forms were blank. They had been prepared but not yet executed. They were waiting. Then I opened Marcus's desk. I want to be precise about this. I had never opened Marcus's desk before, not in 7 years of marriage. His workspace had been his own, and I had respected that without thinking about it, the way you respect a habit that has never needed to be examined. I opened it now. In the second drawer, beneath a manila folder of insurance documents, was a thumb drive. I took it to my computer. It contained a single folder labeled with a date. 3 months ago, the month Priya had spoken to Daniel at the wine bar. Inside that folder were 3 files, a spreadsheet detailing the equity in my house and its current market valuation, an email thread between Marcus and Eleanor's attorney discussing the mechanics of a voluntary transfer under marital agreement, and a document I needed to read 3 times before my mind accepted what it was saying, a draft divorce filing, initiated by Marcus, in which the property at Elmwood Drive was listed as a jointly held marital asset. It was not a jointly held marital asset. It was in my name alone, as any competent family law attorney would immediately recognize. And yet there was the draft, with my address on it, with my name rendered as a co-holder, with a handwritten note in the margin in Eleanor's precise, looping script. Needs his signature before she changes beneficiaries. I sat at my desk for a very long time. The house was quiet around me. The oak tree in the backyard moved slightly in the November wind, its branches tapping the fence with a soft, patient rhythm. My hands were completely still. I felt no trembling now, no tightness in the chest, none of the physical symptoms of crisis. What I felt was the absolute, weightless clarity of someone who has arrived at the end of a long journey and is finally taking their bearings. I picked up my phone and called Thomas Reyes. Tom was the best family law partner at my firm, a meticulous, unhurried man who had handled some of the most complex marital property cases in North Carolina. "Tom," I said when he answered, "I need an hour of your time today, off the clock. Personal matter." A pause. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm going to be," I said, "but I need to move quickly." I met Tom at his office at noon. I brought the photographs, the thumb drive, and a handwritten timeline I had put together in the 2 hours between Priya's kitchen and his office door. He listened without interrupting, a quality I had always respected in him. And when I finished, he turned the printed photographs in his hands with careful attention. "The joint asset misrepresentation in the draft filing is the key piece," he said finally. "That's actionable. Combined with the documented transfer attempt, with your photograph evidence, what you have is a paper trail of coordinated financial misconduct." He looked at me over the photographs. "She's his mother," he said. "Not a defense. An observation, the way a doctor names the thing before treating it." "I know," I said. "How quickly can I file a protective order on the property?" "I can have it done by Monday morning," he said, "and I'd recommend separating your financial accounts today, this afternoon." "I already plan to," I said. "Good," he said, and the word came with a quiet respect that I filed away carefully because I needed it. I drove to the bank. Standing at the teller's window, closing the joint account we had held for 3 years and transferring the balance to a new sole account, I felt no hesitation, no grief, no retroactive second-guessing. I felt the clear, methodical satisfaction of someone doing the right thing at the right time, one step at a time. The way I had built my career, the way I had saved for the house, the way I had survived every difficult thing that had ever come to me, by doing what was necessary with both hands, without flinching. Marcus came home at 6 that evening. I heard his key in the lock, heard him set his bag down in the hallway, heard the particular sound of a man moving through a house he believes is still his. I was in the kitchen. I had made tea, which sounds like an incongruous detail but was entirely deliberate. I wanted something warm in my hands, and I wanted the ordinary domesticity of the scene, the unremarkable teacup on the unremarkable counter, because what I was about to do required stillness, and stillness required an environment that did not amplify. He came into the kitchen. He stopped when he saw my face. "Clara," he said. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. He sat. I remained standing. I placed the printed photographs on the table between us, face up, one by one, as though laying cards. The transfer forms, the email thread, the draft filing with his mother's handwriting in the margin. He looked at them. I watched his face move through several expressions in quick succession. Recognition, calculation, the beginning of something that might have become an explanation. And then he settled into stillness. The stillness of a man who has run every available option and understood that none of them are good. "Where did you—" he started. "It doesn't matter where," I said. What matters is that I have them, and Tom Reyes has copies, and a protective order on this property will be in place by Monday morning. Silence. He looked at the table. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove moved through its small, indifferent arc. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said finally, and his voice was so genuinely wretched that for just one moment, the length of a breath, I felt something close to pity. And then I remembered the table, the 12 faces, the 6 words delivered with the composure of a man who had decided long before he sat down that I was something to be managed rather than loved. "You knew," I said. "You knew about those documents 18 months ago, and you stood in this kitchen and told me she was just exploring options. You've been on her calls. You knew about the attorney in Greenville. You had that thumb drive in your desk." I paused. "And you arranged a dinner in front of witnesses, and you humiliated me publicly, and I want you to tell me right now, was that her idea or yours?" He didn't answer immediately. The silence was its own answer. It wasn't supposed to go like that," he said. "She thought that if things seemed unstable between us, it would be easier to..." "Easier to what?" I said. My voice was very quiet. "Easier to justify," he said. "The transfer, the restructuring. Easier to justify stealing from me. Easier to make it look like a troubled marriage rather than a calculated theft. Easier to make me look like the problem." I looked at him sitting at my kitchen table in my house that he had tried to take from me, and I felt something close to sadness. Not for him, not for what he had done, but for the version of him I had believed in, for the 7 years of Sunday mornings and lamb stew and ordinary kindness that had been real and that had not been enough to make him choose me over his mother's plan. Some people are not capable of choosing. Some people arrange dinners. "You need to be out of this house by Saturday morning," I said. "Tom will send the formal notice tomorrow." He started to speak. "Marcus," I said. He stopped. "Saturday morning," I said again, and I turned and carried my tea to my office and closed the door. Eleanor called the following evening. I let it ring twice, and the third time I picked up. "Clara," she said with the warm, slightly wounded tone she used when preparing to frame something as my fault. "I think we need to talk, just the two of us, woman to woman. There's been a very unfortunate misunderstanding." "There hasn't been a misunderstanding," I said. "I have the documents, Eleanor. I have the emails between you and your attorney. I have the draft filing. I have all of it, and so does my lawyer." A pause. "Those were preliminary..." "Don't," I said. Just that word. She was quiet. "After everything we've been through as a family..." She started again, and I felt the familiar tug of that phrase. "We're family. After all I've done. You're being so unreasonable." And I let it pass through me without catching. "I'll be filing a complaint with the state bar regarding your attorney's conduct in preparing fraudulent marital property documentation," I said. "And I'll be sending a formal letter to you and to Marcus's employer outlining the coordinated nature of the financial misconduct. I want you to understand clearly that I'm not angry. I'm just thorough." A long pause. When she spoke again, the warmth was entirely gone. What was underneath it was smaller and harder, and considerably less elegant than the performance she had been giving for 7 years. "You think you've won something," she said. "I think I've protected what's mine," I said, "which is all I ever wanted to do." I hung up. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that because it would be false to describe the unwinding of a 7-year marriage as clean or painless, even when it is necessary, even when you are the one who is right. There were nights when I lay in the house on Elmwood Drive in the dark and felt the absence of another person in the space as something almost physical, a subtraction, a hollowness in rooms that had been full. There were moments at the office when something funny would happen and I would reach, reflexively, for my phone to tell Marcus, and then remember and feel the gap of that. Grief is not rational. You can know exactly what someone did and still grieve the person you thought they were. I let myself grieve. I gave it its time and its space, and then I got back to work. The bar complaint against Eleanor's attorney resulted in a formal censure and a 6-month suspension. The fraudulent characterization in the draft filing was referred to the county prosecutor's office. It did not result in criminal charges. Tom had prepared me for this. The evidentiary threshold for financial fraud in unconsummated documents is genuinely difficult to meet, but it resulted in something that mattered more. It became a matter of public record. Eleanor's name was in the filing. Marcus's involvement was documented. The careful, years-long construction of their respectability had a crack in it, now that no amount of Sunday dinners or cream-colored dresses would ever fully cover. Marcus and I finalized the divorce 9 months after the dinner at Aurelio's. He did not contest the property. Tom told me afterward that his attorney had advised him in the strongest possible terms that contesting it would be inadvisable, given the evidence in the record. He signed the papers on a Tuesday morning, and Tom called me at the office, and I said, "Thank you," and hung up and sat at my desk for a moment, with my hands flat on the wood, and breathed. I heard from Daniel 3 months later. A brief, almost formal email saying he thought I had handled everything with more dignity than the situation required, that he was sorry he hadn't spoken sooner, that he hoped I was well. I wrote back 2 sentences, that I appreciated his honesty with Priya, and that I wished him and his wife well. I meant both. It is November again now, a full year since I stood on the sidewalk outside Aurelio's in the midnight blue dress and felt the ground rearrange itself beneath my feet. The lavender along the back fence has come in better than it ever has. Something about the harder pruning I did in early spring, a cut I had been too cautious to make in previous years. I stood on the wraparound porch this morning with my coffee, watching the oak trees on Elmwood Drive go golden in the early light, and I felt the house around me the way I felt it the very first time I walked through it, as something genuinely mine, solid and particular, and earned. The neighbor called over the fence that the frost advisory had been lifted. I told her I'd already known. I'd been checking the weather every morning like a person who has things worth protecting. I don't think about Marcus every day anymore. Some days, not at all. What I think about instead is the woman who walked out of that restaurant without looking back, who sat in a car with her best friend and thought, quietly and with complete certainty, that she was going to do what was necessary. I think about how long I had known, and how long I had chosen not to act on the knowing, and how the moment he said those 6 words in front of 12 people, he gave me the one thing I had been missing. The absolute, unambiguous clarity that there was nothing left to protect except myself. He thought humiliation was a weapon. It turned out to be a gift. The most expensive gift anyone has ever given me, and the most useful. Some things, when they break, don't need to be fixed. They need to be replaced with something better. I am working on that. I have time. I have the house. I have the lavender. That is more than enough to begin.